So, I finally arrived at my vacation home, hoping to escape all the stress and chaos from work. I mean, after 6 weeks of brutal depositions, late night briefs, and courtroom battles, I just needed peace, you know. But when I got there, things weren't exactly as I expected. My Uncle Marcus, of all people, was standing inside, and he wasn't happy to see me. "You're not welcome here," he shouted, his face twisted with pure hatred. I mean, imagine walking into your own home and being told that it was like a slap to the face. But here's the thing, he didn't know something. I was the lawyer who wrote the family trust, the very same trust he was so close to violating. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how this plays out. Stick around, because the real twist is coming. What's your favorite way to unwind after a stressful week? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I pulled up to my vacation home after what felt like an eternity, 6 weeks of brutal court cases and sleepless nights. And all I wanted was to step into the familiar comfort of a parents' old house. I could almost smell the pine trees already, hear the soft lapping of the lake against the shore. It was the one place in the world I could count on to give me peace. My sanctuary. The A-frame cabin my father had built with his own 2 hands. The one place where nothing could touch me, not the law, not family drama, not anything. Or so I thought. As I turned the car down the long gravel driveway, the familiar crunch of stones under the tires brought a sense of relief. The tension in my shoulders beginning to loosen. There was something so comforting about that sound. It was like the driveway itself was saying, "Welcome home." The house came into view, and for a moment, everything felt right. My dad's craftsmanship was on full display, straight, clean lines, a roof that stretched up into the sky, and the big front porch with wooden steps that always seemed to invite you in. I could feel the weight of the last few months finally lifting off me. This was my place of peace. But when I pulled up and got out of the car, things felt off. I grabbed my overnight bag, stepped into the cool evening air, and walked toward the front door. Everything about it felt the same except for the key that was supposed to fit perfectly into the lock. I slid it into the door, but it didn't turn. I jiggled it, and still nothing. That familiar little click I had always relied on was missing. I frowned. Maybe the lock was just stuck. Or maybe it was my exhaustion. But as I stood there, trying to turn the key again, a cold knot of dread started to form in my stomach. The lock felt wrong. It didn't feel like my lock. It was like it had been blocked, changed. I knocked on the door, my knuckles rapping against the heavy oak. No answer. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering just slightly. I felt a strange mixture of uncertainty and confusion. What the hell was going on? I had been here 100 times before, and I had always been able to my heart started to beat faster as I listened for movement inside. After what seemed like forever, I finally heard a shuffle. The door creaked open, but it wasn't a stranger standing there, like I had expected. No, it was my Uncle Marcus. Now, Marcus had always been a complicated figure in our family. He was 62 years old, my father's older brother, and a man who wore his failed ambitions like an expensive, ill-fitting suit. He'd always had an air of oily charm, one of those people who could talk a big game about the next big thing, but never seemed to follow through. He had this tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. But now, standing in the doorway, he was no longer the slick, smooth-talking uncle I remembered. His face was hard, cold, and filled with an unmistakable bitterness. There was no surprise in his eyes, no warmth, no recognition, just cold, simmering resentment. "Marcus," I said, my voice trailing off, unsure what to even ask. "What are you doing here? I mean, this was supposed to be my safe place. What was he doing in my house?" My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't even remember the last time I had seen him, let alone expected him to be here. "You changed the locks," I added, still trying to make sense of what was happening. My mind was buzzing with confusion. This was my home, my property. What the hell was going on? He looked at me, his face hardening even more. "Yeah," he said, his voice level, almost too calm for the situation. "I changed the locks. Is there a problem?" His chest puffed out just slightly, as if he was trying to assert some kind of control over the situation, as if he thought he had every right to do this. I stood there, dumbfounded. "You changed the locks? Why would you do that?" "This is my house," I said, feeling the frustration bubble up in my chest. I had worked so hard for everything I had, and now this, it didn't make sense. Behind him, I could see movement in the living room, and my stomach twisted with a new sense of dread. My younger sister, Lauren, was sitting on the sofa. She didn't even look at me. Her head was lowered, her hands folded in her lap, and next to her was her husband, Albert, sitting with his arms crossed, looking every bit as defensive as Marcus. I stared at them, trying to process what I was seeing. My sister. My own sister. I had helped put her through college. I had paid for her first apartment. I had always been there for her. And here she was, sitting on the couch, looking so ashamed. And Albert, the guy who always complained about being underpaid, now sitting there as if he belonged. This wasn't the family I remembered. Marcus stepped aside, clearly enjoying the control he had gained over the situation. "This is a family home," he said, his voice rising, turning smug. "And we've decided, the real family, that we're tired of you hoarding it." That one hit me like a punch to the gut. Hoarding it. What was he talking about? The exhaustion from my case, 6 weeks of relentless work, seemed to evaporate in that instant, replaced by a sharp, cold shock. Hoarding it, I was the trustee. My dad had left it to me in the will. I didn't hoard it. I was taking care of it like I was supposed to. This was all so wrong. I took a step back, my mind reeling. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the hurt was starting to seep in. "Marcus, you know this. Dad left it to me in the will." "Oh, a piece of paper," Marcus spat, his face turning a blotchy red. His words dripped with disdain, as if he didn't care about the will, the trust, any of it. He didn't care about the law. "A piece of paper that you probably wrote yourself with your slick lawyer tricks to cut us all out?" His voice was rising now, filled with pure hatred. "You always thought you were better than us." I took a deep breath, but I could feel my patience wearing thin. "That's not true," I said softly, but my voice had a sharp edge to it now. "And you know it." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he stared at me with unfiltered rage. "You're not welcome here, Abigail," he sneered, his voice rising to a shout. "Get off this property." The words hit me like a slap across the face, reverberating through the quiet evening air. My sister and her husband just sat there, saying nothing. Their silence, in that moment, was more damning than anything Marcus had said. They just sat there, complicit in this betrayal. I looked at their faces, Lauren, ashamed but silent, and Albert, stubbornly hostile. I felt the ground fall out from beneath me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a small family squabble. This was a full-on betrayal, one I had never seen coming. My own family, in my own sanctuary, telling me to leave. I could feel the sting of betrayal deep in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. My first instinct was to fight, to argue, to pull out my phone and call the police. But I was an attorney, and I knew that a messy public fight wasn't the way to handle this, especially not when I started to realize what was really going on. So I did something they didn't expect. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a smile of relief or joy. No, this was the smile I reserved for opposing counsel when they had just torpedoed their own case. It was all teeth, sharp and cold. I didn't flinch. "Okay," I said softly. Marcus blinked, his smug expression faltering, his confusion evident. He hadn't expected this. He was waiting for me to scream, to beg, to cry, but I didn't. "Okay, you're leaving for now," I continued, letting my hand fall from the door. I didn't look at him. Not really. I looked past him, to Lauren, who was still sitting there, eyes lowered, refusing to meet my gaze. But I held hers, just for a second, letting her see the profound disappointment in my eyes. I turned back to Marcus. "You're right, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This is a family home." And then I added, my voice almost a whisper, "And as the family's lawyer, I'm just reminding you that you should always read the fine print." Marcus's triumphant expression faltered, and for a split second, I saw real fear flicker in his eyes. But before he could respond, I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked away, a mixture of confusion and smug victory. They thought they had won. They thought that because I didn't scream or cry or call the sheriff, I was weak. But they were wrong. They had mistaken my controlled fury for surrender. It was a mistake they would come to regret. As I stood there, walking back to my car, my mind was racing. What had just happened? How had this gone so far? So quickly, I couldn't make sense of it. I had just been blindsided by Marcus, and worse, by Lauren and Albert. I thought I knew my family. I thought I could trust them. But now, everything had changed. As I got in my car, I started to think about it more clearly. I didn't have time to let the emotions take over. I had a job to do, a case to handle, a fight to win, and I needed to do it right. I drove down the gravel road and out to the main highway. The further I got from the lake house, the more my thoughts started to settle. That knot of confusion in my stomach didn't loosen, though I was still reeling from the betrayal. I needed answers. I needed to know exactly what Marcus had done to turn my own family against me, to make them believe I was the villain. But more than that, I needed to be prepared. The first thing I did when I got to a nearby hotel was open my laptop and connect to the Wi-Fi. As an estate lawyer, I had access to a wealth of resources. But my professional life wasn't just about having access, it was about knowing how to use it. I needed to get to the heart of this situation. I needed information. And I knew that Marcus, in his arrogance, would have left a trail. So I started making a list of everything I needed to do. First, I had to look at the trust, the Harris family irrevocable trust. My parents had created it years ago, and I was the sole trustee. It wasn't a simple will that left everything to me directly. No, my father had been too smart for that. He had seen the way Marcus had always eyed their property, how he had used his charm to try to extract money from them. Marcus had borrowed money from them time and time again, but never repaid a dime. So when it came to estate planning, my dad had been clear he wanted to ensure that the family property would stay in the family, but that meant putting specific protections in place, ones that Marcus couldn't just talk his way around. I opened up the file on my laptop, scrolling through the legalese I had written myself. It wasn't anything too complicated, just clear, precise language. I had set up the trust in such a way that no one could make a claim on the property without my approval. Marcus, of course, would never read the fine print. He probably thought he could talk his way into getting his hands on the lake house, as he always did. But that wasn't going to happen, not this time. As I read through the trust document, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The no contest clause, the one I had written into the trust to prevent anyone from trying to dispute the terms, was standard. But Section 4, the asset protection clause. I smiled to myself. This was the part that Marcus had missed. This was the part that was going to put him in his place. The clause specifically stated that no beneficiary, no one except me, as trustee, could change the locks, take out loans against the property, or even establish primary residence in the house without my express written consent. If they did, they would be in material breach of the trust. This was the moment I knew for sure Marcus had made his move, and now it was time to fight back. I closed the document and leaned back in the chair, taking a deep breath. I could feel the calm, controlled fury bubbling up. I wasn't going to let this go. Marcus had crossed a line, and now he was going to pay for it. I made my first call Frank. Frank was a private investigator, and more importantly, he was someone I could trust, a former financial crimes detective. He had the kind of knowledge that could help me dig up the dirt on Marcus. I needed to know if Marcus was in financial trouble, if he was desperate enough to make a move like this. So I called him up. "Hey Frank, it's Abigail Harris," I said, my voice steady. "Abby, long time. What's the emergency?" "You only call me when someone's trying to hide money, Basa," Frank replied, his voice rough but warm. I smiled. "Something like that. I need you to run a full financial background check on Marcus Harris. I want everything: credit report, outstanding liens, recent loan applications, shell corporations, anything you can find. I want to know if he's been hiding anything. Anything at all." "Family's messy," Frank grunted. "You got it? Give me 48 hours. "Thanks, Frank. I owe you one," I said, already thinking ahead. I knew Frank would get results. He always did. Next, I had to take action with the utilities at the lake house. I knew that changing the locks was just the beginning. Marcus wasn't stupid. He wouldn't have done this without a backup plan. He would have tried to change the utilities, put them in his name, make it harder for me to prove I was the one in control. So I called the utility companies: electricity, water, internet. The process was simple. All I had to do was explain that someone had fraudulently changed the service accounts, and I was the rightful property owner. I had the trust document to back me up. Piece of cake, one by one. I got confirmation that the changes had been made without my consent. The internet bill had been upgraded to a premium package. Of course, that was Marcus, always trying to live large. And the bill had been put in Albert's name. Albert? Why would he be the one to handle it? Was Marcus using him as a shield? It was starting to look more and more like Marcus had planned this carefully. He wasn't just trying to take the house. He was using the whole family as pawns in his scheme. The moment I realized this wasn't just a family squabble, that it was a conspiracy, was when I discovered that the locks had been changed 3 weeks ago. They had waited for me to be tied up with my case, exhausted and out of touch, so they could make their move. Marcus had been playing the long game, and now it was time for me to get even. As I sat there, going through the notes and documents, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. Marcus had used my family's trust against me, turned them against me. Lauren, who I had helped put through college, who I had always treated like a sister, had allowed herself to be manipulated. Albert, who I had helped financially when they were struggling, had gotten involved in this mess, too. And Marcus? He was the mastermind behind it all. He was the one who had spun them a story, convincing them that I was the villain, that I was trying to take the house away from them, but none of that was true. I had done everything I could to keep the property in the family, to protect it from people like Marcus. I couldn't let this go. Not now. Not when I was this close to having all the proof I needed to expose Marcus for the fraud he was. It wasn't just the house that he was after. It was the money. He had manipulated Lauren and Albert into thinking I was the one who didn't care about the family, that I was just some cold, selfish lawyer trying to profit off their inheritance. But Marcus wasn't a hero in this story. He was the villain. He had lied, stolen, and now he was trying to get away with it. The next day, I spent hours compiling everything I had learned: the utility bills, the records from the bank, the proof that Marcus had been trying to take out a loan against the property. I put it all together, making sure everything was airtight. I had everything I needed to bring him down, and I wasn't going to stop until I did. I needed to make sure that Marcus knew that this wasn't just a fight over a house. This was about respect. This was about loyalty. And he had crossed a line. He had used my family to try to destroy me. But he had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. And now he was going to pay. I sat in the hotel room, my mind racing. Marcus had crossed a line, and now I had to make sure he paid for it. I wasn't just a lawyer. I was the one who had written the trust that governed the family property, the one who understood every nuance of it. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I couldn't afford to let Marcus get away with this. He'd turned my own family against me, tried to manipulate them, and worse, he was after something that didn't belong to him. It was personal now, but it was also professional. I wasn't going to let a man like Marcus destroy what my parents had worked so hard for. I pulled out my laptop and started organizing my thoughts. First things first, I had to dig into Marcus's finances. I knew this wasn't just about a house to him. If it were, he would have tried to fight me legally. But no, Marcus was trying to turn my family against me to get his hands on something more valuable than money. His manipulations had a clear financial motive, and that was what I needed to expose. The house was just a means to an end. I wasn't just guessing. I had been around long enough to know how people like Marcus worked. They talked a good game, they spun a story, but in the end, it always came down to money. And when it came to money, I had the skills to find the truth. I wasn't a novice at this. I had spent years working on complicated estates, wading through the financial statements of wealthy families, looking for any sign of fraud or mismanagement. I had the knowledge and the tools to dig deep, and I was going to use every bit of it to expose Marcus for who he really was. I picked up the phone and dialed Frank. I trusted Frank, and I needed him to help me pull together the financial information that could bring Marcus down. Frank was a private investigator with years of experience in financial crimes. He had a knack for finding the things people thought were hidden, and I knew he could uncover the evidence I needed. "Hey, Frank," I said. Once he picked up, "It's Abigail." "Abby, what's going on?" Frank's voice was rough, but there was warmth there, a familiarity that made me feel like I had someone on my side. "I need you to dig into Marcus Harris. Get me everything you can: credit reports, outstanding loans, bank statements, any shell companies. I need it all," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Marcus, huh? Family's always the worst," Frank muttered. "You got it. I'll need a couple of days, but I'll get it done." "Thanks, Frank," I said, relief flooding through me. "I owe you one." "You sure do," he replied with a laugh before hanging up. I hung up the phone and felt a momentary flicker of hope. This was a step in the right direction. I didn't have much time, but I had a plan. I wasn't going to sit back and let Marcus walk all over me. He was going to pay for what he'd done to my family, to me. While I waited for Frank to work his magic, I decided to take a closer look at the trust document. I knew it inside and out, but I needed to be sure, was there anything else in the document I could use to strengthen my position? I opened the file and started scanning through it again. My father's wishes were clear. He had wanted the house to stay in the family, but he also knew that some family members were more interested in money than sentiment. That's why he'd given me sole control over the property as trustee. He didn't trust anyone else to manage it. And now I understood why. As I read through the trust, I paid extra attention to the clauses that dealt with asset protection and the power of the trustee. It was clear that I had the legal authority to protect the property, but I also had a moral obligation to ensure that it didn't get torn apart by people like Marcus. He wasn't just trying to get the house, he was using my family's financial struggles to manipulate them. He saw them as weak links, people who could be swayed by promises of easy money. but he had underestimated me. I closed the document and leaned back in the chair. I could feel the tension in my shoulders. I was getting closer to the truth, but I needed more. I needed concrete evidence, and that's where Frank came in. While I waited for him to gather the information, I thought about the next steps. If Marcus was trying to manipulate Lauren and Albert, he had to be doing it with something concrete. He must have convinced them that I was the villain, that I was trying to sell the house, that I didn't care about the family. But I knew that wasn't true. I wasn't trying to sell the house. Not at all. I was trying to protect it for them. I didn't just have legal expertise, I had years of experience dealing with family disputes, and I knew exactly how to handle Marcus. The key was to stay calm, stay controlled. If I let my emotions get in the way, I would lose. But I had a plan now, and I was going to stick to it. The next day, I went through the motions of following up on my investigation. I called the utility companies to get the records of any changes that had been made to the lake house's accounts. As expected, I discovered that Marcus had tried to change the utility bills and put them in Albert's name. That was a crucial piece of evidence. If Marcus had been manipulating the utility accounts, it was clear that he was trying to make himself the legitimate occupant of the house, to cement his control over it. I also got in touch with the local bank, just to confirm whether Marcus had applied for a loan against the house. Frank had promised to get back to me with a report, but I didn't want to sit idly by. The more information I gathered, the stronger my position would be. The bank confirmed that there had been an application for a home equity line of credit, but it had been denied. Marcus had listed himself as the owner of the property, which was both ridiculous and infuriating. I was the trustee, the one with legal control. Marcus had overstepped, and now I had the proof to back it up. As I went through the evidence, I could feel my resolve growing stronger. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Marcus was not just a family member I had to deal with, he was a criminal. He had tried to manipulate me, my sister, and her husband, all for his own selfish gain. He wasn't just after a house, he was after money, plain and simple. And he was willing to destroy everything for it. By the time Frank called back, I had a solid foundation of evidence. He'd tracked down Marcus's financial situation, and it wasn't pretty. Marcus had 3 maxed out credit cards, a personal loan from a high-interest lender, and get this, he had been sued by 2 former business partners for $500,000. It was a perfect storm of desperation. Marcus wasn't just trying to take the house for himself. He was trying to steal everything he could get his hands on to cover his debts. I smiled to myself as Frank went over the details. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Marcus had made his move, and now I had everything I needed to take him down. It was a matter of gathering the pieces, putting them together, and then letting the truth speak for itself. I knew the next steps. I had the evidence, and I had the law on my side. I was going to make sure that Marcus paid for what he'd done. But I also knew this wasn't going to be easy. He was going to fight back. He wasn't going to just roll over. But that was fine with me. I was ready. I had a plan. And now it was time to execute it. The day had finally come. I had gathered everything I needed, the evidence, the proof, and the unwavering resolve to stand up for what was right. I had spent days preparing for this moment, piecing together the financial mess Marcus had tried to cover up. And now it was time to confront him. I wasn't going to let him walk away this time. He had played the victim, made me out to be the villain, and manipulated my sister and her husband into believing his lies. It was time to expose him for who he really was. I had arranged the meeting at my parents' old law firm. It felt fitting to hold it there, in the place where so many important family decisions had been made. The conference room was large, imposing, and filled with dark mahogany furniture, the high ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a room designed to command attention. But today, it wasn't about the room. It was about the truth. Lauren and Albert were already there, sitting at the far end of the table, looking uncomfortable. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the way they avoided each other's gaze. They were nervous, and I couldn't blame them. They knew what was coming. What they didn't know was how bad it would get. Marcus, of course, showed up right on time. He walked in wearing his best suit, trying to project an air of wounded dignity, but there was a smugness to his posture, a sense of superiority that made my blood boil. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he could control the narrative, that he could manipulate everyone around him and get away with it, but not this time. Abigail's his son, he said, nodding curtly as if he was the one in charge. Clara, glad you could make it. His tone was condescending, as if he was about to explain his side of the story to the rest of the family. He sat down at the table opposite Lauren and Albert, not bothering to acknowledge me any further. I stood at the head of the table, my arms crossed, taking in the scene. Aunt Clara, my father's sister, was sitting next to me, her sharp eyes watching everything with the kind of scrutiny only she could bring. She had always been the matriarch of the family, the one who kept everyone in line. She had always seen through Marcus's charm, but today, she would see just how deep his deceit ran. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice calm but firm. I wasn't going to let Marcus dominate this meeting. I know there's been a lot of confusion regarding the lake house and other family matters. I called this meeting to provide absolute, final clarity. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping him before he could say a word. You'll have your turn, Marcus, I said, my voice dripping with controlled authority. Mine first. He glared at me, but he didn't say anything. His confidence faltered for just a second, and I could see the tension in his jaw. Good. He knew this wasn't going to go the way he planned. I turned to Aunt Clara, who had been watching the scene unfold silently. Aunt Clara, I said, meeting her gaze. You know that Dad appointed me as trustee of the family trust. Marcus has been spreading a rumor that I intend to sell the house. A valid concern. Abigail. Aunt Clara responded, her eyes sharp. That house means a lot to this family. It does, I agreed, which is why my father and I legally structured the trust to make it impossible to sell without the unanimous consent of all beneficiaries and proof that the trust can no longer afford the upkeep. It is perhaps one of the most protected properties in the state. I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in. The rumor was a lie, manufactured for one purpose: to create panic. Marcus has been feeding it to Lauren and Albert, and that's why we're here today. Marcus shifted in his chair, his smug expression faltering, but he wasn't done yet. But that's not all, I continued, my voice growing colder. You told Lauren and Albert that I was the one cutting them out, but in reality, you were the one who tried to take out a $150,000 loan against the property, a property you do not own. I slid the first folder across the table toward Marcus. The sound of it hitting the polished wood echoed through the room. This is called attempted bank fraud, I said, my tone still calm, but filled with enough force to cut through the air. That's a copy of the application you filed and the bank's denial, and the report I've already filed with their fraud department. Marcus's face went white. His arrogance was crumbling in front of him. I could see the panic starting to seep in, but he wasn't ready to give up. He was a fighter, and that made this all the more satisfying. Now, was it also a misunderstanding when you changed the locks on my house? I asked, my voice rising with each word. Was it a misunderstanding when you put the utility bills in Albert's name, making him legally complicit in your illegal occupation? I slid a second folder across the table, the sound of the paper hitting the surface like a final nail in the coffin. That's a copy of the utility bill, Albert, and a copy of the new high-security lock invoice, which I paid for. Marcus recoiled at the evidence, his earlier bravado completely gone. He was cornered, and he knew it. But still, he tried to salvage his pride. "You don't understand," he said, his voice wavering. "You're twisting this. I didn't—" "No, Marcus," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his defenses. "This is the part that I find most offensive. For the last 6 months, you've been advising Lauren and Albert on their finances. You convinced them to give you $10,000 of their retirement money to invest. You lied to them, and you lied to me. And now I have the proof." I dropped a thick folder onto the table, the weight of it unmistakable. "Here's the final file. Marcus." I slid the third folder across to him. "This file contains the bank statements showing the $10,000 leaving Lauren's account and entering yours. It also contains the subsequent receipts, $4,000 as a down payment on a luxury car lease, and $6,000 withdrawn over 2 weekends at the Tropicana Casino in Atlantic City." Aunt Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "You didn't invest their money," I said, my voice steady, but the anger simmering just below the surface. "You stole it. You stole my sister's money to pay for your car and your gambling habit. You preyed on your own family, turned them against me, and tried to steal our parents' home, all to cover your own pathetic debts." Lauren's face went white, her eyes wide with disbelief. Albert's hands shook as he picked up the paper, his face drained of color. The truth was landing on them with the force of a sledgehammer, and they couldn't deny it any longer. They had been manipulated. "No," Lauren whispered, her voice cracking. "No, he wouldn't." "He did," I said, my voice hard as steel. "And I have the proof." Albert was the first to speak, his voice quiet but filled with a newfound horror. You put my name on the utility bill," he asked, barely able to process the truth. "I was consolidating things to make it easier for the family." Marcus stammered, his voice too high-pitched, too desperate. He was still trying to spin it, but his lies were falling apart, piece by piece. "You were making him the legal point of contact for a property you're illegally occupying." "Marcus," I shot back, my words piercing through his excuses. Lauren stood up, shaking. "Uncle Marcus," she whispered, "just tell me you didn't try to sell the house." "Of course not," Marcus sputtered, but there was no conviction in his words anymore. "I was looking into its value for our future, for all of us." His voice cracked, the lies becoming increasingly transparent. "It's pathetic," I said, the finality in my voice undeniable. "The lies are so obvious, Marcus, that they're falling apart the moment you speak them. You've been lying to everyone, manipulating them, and now it's all out in the open." Lauren's eyes were filled with pain. "All those years," she whispered, "I thought Abby was the cold one, but it was you. It was always you." Albert stood up next to her, his fists clenched. You will give us our money back, or I swear." His voice was full of rage, but he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice cutting through the tension. "You don't have to swear," I said, "because I've already filed the criminal complaint." Marcus's face was ashen, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was finished. I had won. The truth had destroyed him, and now he had nothing left. The silence in the room was deafening as Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked like a small, pathetic man, now nothing like the confident, manipulative figure he had once been. He turned toward the door, grabbed his keys, and bolted out, his escape as frantic as his fall from grace. And just like that, it was over. Marcus was gone. Just like that, he was out of our lives, driven away by his lies, his manipulations, and the truth that I had finally laid bare. But while the legal battle was over, The emotional toll was only just beginning. The aftermath of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the family fractured by greed and envy, it all settled in like a weight I couldn't shake off. My parents' house, the place that had always felt like my sanctuary, was no longer a symbol of comfort. It was a reminder of how deep the wounds in my family had gone. I couldn't deny the relief I felt. Marcus was done. He had no more power, no more control over me, my sister, or the property. But at the same time, something in me had shifted. I wasn't just fighting for the house anymore. I was fighting for my family, for Lauren, for Albert, for the relationships that had been torn apart by Marcus's deceit. And while I had won the battle, I didn't feel the victory I thought I would. It wasn't about the property anymore. It was about what we had lost. It was about the trust that had been broken, not just between me and Marcus, but between me and the people I loved. I spent the next couple of weeks in a kind of emotional haze. I didn't know what to feel. There was so much anger, so much frustration at Marcus for manipulating us all, frustration at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting Lauren better. I had always been the protector. That had been my role since we were kids. And now I wasn't sure what I was anymore. I hadn't spoken much to Lauren or Albert after the confrontation. They were still processing the shock of it all. They had been so blinded by Marcus's lies that they didn't see what was happening until it was almost too late. I could see the regret in their eyes every time I spoke to them, and it cut me deeper than I expected. I wasn't angry with them. I was angry at the situation, at how easily Marcus had twisted them against me. I had always been there for them too much, maybe, and now it felt like everything I had done for them, everything I had sacrificed, had been taken for granted, but I wasn't going to let that tear us apart. I couldn't. The last thing I wanted was for this betrayal to drive a permanent wedge between us. So I decided to take the first step. I called Lauren. It had been days since I'd seen her, and the silence between us was unbearable. "Lauren," I said when she picked up, "we need to talk." I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the weight of everything she'd been carrying. "I know," she whispered. I don't know what to say. Abby, I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just listened. I could hear her trying to hold herself together, but the cracks were already showing. She was breaking down, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for her. She had been manipulated by Marcus, but she had also let herself be manipulated. And I had let it happen. I had let Marcus poison her against me. "You don't need to apologize," I finally said, my voice softer now. "I know you were caught up in it. I know you didn't mean for any of this to happen. But you have to understand, Lauren, it's not just about the house. It's about trust. I paused, taking a deep breath. "You let Marcus turn you against me, and that's not something we can just ignore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then Lauren's voice cracked. "I know," she whispered. "I know. I was wrong. I let him do that to us. To me. I thought I was protecting us, but I wasn't. I let him take advantage of me." My heart ached for her. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about her believing that she had to protect herself from me, that I was the one who didn't care. "You're not alone, Lauren," I said, my voice steady. "You're my sister, and I love you. But we have to rebuild from this. We have to learn from it." The words felt heavy, but they were true. I wasn't going to let this define us. It would take time, but I knew we could heal if we wanted to, if we were willing to. We spent the next few hours talking, not just about what had happened, but about everything the past, the things we had been through as a family, the way Marcus had torn us apart without us even realizing it. I listened as Lauren cried, as she told me about how confused she had been, about how much she had wanted to believe Marcus, how he had preyed on her fear and insecurity. It was painful to hear, but it was the truth, and hearing it gave me the clarity I needed. By the time we hung up, there was a quiet understanding between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction, a hard, painful step, but a step nonetheless. The next day, Albert called me. I had been waiting for him to reach out. I knew he had his own guilt to process, but I also knew that he didn't want to lose his sister. He didn't want to lose me either. Abby, I don't know where to begin, he said, his voice filled with regret. Just start with the truth, I replied, my tone softening. Tell me what you're feeling. He let out a long sigh. I'm ashamed of myself. I should have known better. I should have trusted you. I let Marcus get into my head, and I let him twist everything around. I thought he was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. You weren't the only one, I said, trying to ease the weight of his guilt. We all let him in. We all let him get too close. But now we have to rebuild. Together. There was a pause, and then Albert spoke again, quieter this time. I know. I'm sorry, and I'm ready to make it right. We'll make it right, I said firmly, but it's going to take time. We can't just sweep this under the rug. Over the next few months, things began to change. It wasn't easy. We had to face the truth about ourselves and the roles we had played in Marcus's schemes. But slowly we started to rebuild the sides. We started to talk about our finances more openly, started to trust each other again. The process was slow, so slow at times that it felt like we were taking one step forward and two steps back. But every day, we got a little bit closer. Lauren and I spent hours going through the trust document together, learning what it really meant, learning what my father had intended for us. We talked about the house too, but we also talked about the things that mattered more, the relationships, the bonds that had been stretched thin, but not broken. There was no single moment of reconciliation. It wasn't a Hollywood moment where everything magically clicked into place, but over time, we began to heal. We learned to communicate, to be vulnerable with each other, to let go of the anger and hurt that had built up over the years. We learned to trust again. The first time I went back to the lake house, 6 months after everything had happened, it felt different. It felt like we were starting fresh. Lauren and Albert were there, cleaning up, taking care of the place. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about making it ours again. We stood on the porch together, looking out over the water, and I finally felt a sense of peace. Lauren turned to me, her face softening. It's beautiful, she said, her voice full of wonder. I really looked at the trust document you wrote, she continued, the one you left for us to read. Dad, he really was smart, wasn't he? He knew. Yes, I said, smiling. He knew. Lauren looked at me for a long moment, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Abby, for protecting us, even when we were the enemy. In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. We had been through the fire, and we had come out the other side, scarred but stronger. We had learned the most important lesson of all that family, real family, was built on trust, respect, and the willingness to forgive. And that was something I could hold on to. That was something I could believe in. The lake house had been our battleground, but now it was a symbol of something more, a symbol of growth, healing, and the power of family. As I stand here, looking back at everything that happened, I can't help but think about how fragile trust can be. Family should be the one place where you're safe, where you can count on each other no matter what. But sometimes, the people you trust most can hurt you the most. It's a painful lesson, but it's also one that teaches you what really matters: loyalty, respect, and understanding. Those are the things that hold us together. It's not always easy to rebuild those bonds once they're broken, but with time, honesty, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes, we can get there. Family isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for. So, what do you think? Have you ever had to deal with betrayal in your own family? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.